You're listening to Are We There Yet? The podcast at intersection of sustainability, technology, and communication. I'm Sonja Ernst.
And I'm Jamie Hardy.
Welcome to our season 3.
This season, we are focusing on the concept of permaculture, especially how it intersects with business and the way humans interact with their environment being wherever they are and whatever's surrounding them. And there's many different kinds of environments, and permaculture is applicable to all kinds of conceptual environments. So we're going to explore many different ways how that interacts.
Sounds good. So, Jimmy, you are very knowledgeable when it comes to permaculture. Tell me a little bit about it. What is permaculture?
Permaculture is a design system that was articulated by two people in the 1970s, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, and they together came up with some ethics and principles that underpin the philosophy of permaculture. There's many permaculture teachers in the world and practitioners. There's certification courses. There's many, many different ones. You can take them online or in person at a farm. And I went through the Permaculture Women's Guild Design Certificate course. I didn't finish it because I had too many projects going on and I couldn't decide which project to make my final project. But I still have all of the coursework and I revisit it all the time. When I need just a little pick-me-up or a little reminder about something, I can go into this particular course's online framework and search for it. But a lot of people do the certification courses, and then there's different levels. You can become an instructor yourself, or you can write about it, but you really don't need the certification because the whole point of permaculture is that it sort of exists without us teaching it. It's sort of a universal truth.
Can you walk us through this process? What does it look like if I follow permaculture principles? It's like a circle.
So if you were to incorporate permaculture principles in your life, you can think about applying them in zones. So if you're designing around a house, let's just say the house is, I would say, zone 0, and then zone 1 is immediately close to the house. So it will get reflection of heat from the building, for example. It'll be right when you step out the door. It'll be, you could reach out your window. You might smell from inside the house. Then there's zone 2. It's a little bit further away. It's going to have different needs. So it goes all the way to zone 5, which would be wilderness, far away. They're distance-based. You can also then think about yourself as having zones. And you've got zones outside of you, but also your inner zones. And so you would use these principles. The ethics are sort of how you live your life. Earth care, people care, fair share. But then you can use principles as sort of a systems thinking approach to tools that you can use, ways that you can perceive the world, just sort of a sustainable framework for tending to your inner zones or the zones around your house or wherever you're gardening.
So I'm hoping that today maybe we can dive deeper into permaculture and how it applies into the business world, into our communities, into our lives. Let us see how that idea of permaculture is relevant today for us. What are some thoughts you have on that?
As I just said, I really think it's always relevant and always sort of a universal truth that we can tap into at any time. I think that many of the concepts that have been articulated have always been a part of traditional cultures around the world, cultures that subsisted off the land or had a very deep interaction with the land had to understand this in a way that we've sort of extracted ourselves from now. But it's still there. And I think that we're kind of living in a fantasy world with our computers and our cars and thinking that these rules don't still apply. I'd love to talk about some of the principles of permaculture, but just as an overarching overview, I think that we've sort of lost touch on a day-to-day basis with how our lives truly do depend on a feedback system with each other and with the earth. We've become more isolated, more reliant on technology, and all of that kind of obscures the truth of how we do interact with each other. And permaculture is a great framework for getting back to understanding what's really going on between us.
Let us think about and discuss some principles of the permaculture. What comes to mind first? I believe there are 9 or 12 of those in different concepts. So, what comes to mind first?
Well, they're written down in an order that sort of build upon each other. And one of my favorite is the very first one, which is observe and interact. And I know not everyone has sort of a personality type that can really observe or take in what's going on in the world. Luckily, that very much fits in with how I operate. For example, let's say you move to a new place or you acquire some sort of relationship with a new piece of land, and you immediately want to put flowers here and put a fruit tree there. But really, you should spend a full year or at least a full cycle of all the seasons observing the land and what is going on and how, oh, well, it's actually really shady here and I wouldn't have thought of that. Or, oh, it floods over here and I wouldn't have noticed that if I didn't witness this rainstorm. And then you can much more thoughtfully plant according to the conditions of the site. Now, that's the same with relationships with humans, with businesses. If you're in change management, you don't just want to come in with your ideas about how things work. There's a whole ecosystem and culture that already exists at these companies. So you have to really observe and not simply observe, but be a part of the system to fully understand it. So that's another concept that's very central to permaculture is that we humans are an essential part of the ecosystem around us. We can't just observe or make our decisions from afar. And I think that's the same with businesses, for example. You have to take in the feedback from the people who are living within the ecosystem of the company.
I see that in the corporate world and with my clients as well, that the leaders who tend to be more successful, they're the ones who pause and observe and take in the new organization and understand the dynamic interactions people have and what is necessary to drive success. And it's not just about people, it is in order to drive the profitability of the organization, one has to understand the mechanisms that play together. And it goes hand in hand with the principles as observe and interact. What are some other principles that you think of that are important in both corporate world, business world, and communities and in our lives?
So, another principle, actually, the second one is to catch and store energy. And so, in the case of permaculture, it's very much about capturing water before it runs off the property, capturing sunlight as a source of energy, but there's human capital, there's human energy, there's capital like physical money that comes in and out of the company, and finding and sort of taking out waste where possible and recycling it back into the system is something that I would think that business leaders would be totally about. And anyone who farms, you let water run off your property, then you have to bring water back onto the property, and all of a sudden you're buying water from somewhere. It's good business sense as well as being sort of a no-brainer cyclically and environmentally.
When it comes to this principle, I often think of the current situation we have in the world, meaning artificial intelligence, technological developments, influence of that into the business best practices. We see the strong need to upskill and reskill the workforce. And the question is, how can we do that and still store the experience that the organization has built over a very long time? So, how do we still keep the resources and the assets in the organization while giving them new purpose and new place where they can thrive, but leverage their knowledge and experience.
So I've got another principle for you, and it's use and value renewable resources and services. So we're back to the perennial nature of permaculture, where wind, solar, hydroelectric power, these are all endlessly renewable because they are happening whether we use them or not. Something like fossil fuels and plastics are something that you can only use once. So you're talking about employees. This also applies to even another principle, which is to apply self-regulation and accept feedback, which ties in with observing and interacting. You need to be able to rejuvenate yourself. Going into burnout makes you a single-use plastic that's thrown away at the end of, eating your takeout food. So if you're able to really believe in your work, which is part of even another principle, which is obtaining a yield. So on a farm, you want to have productive fruits and vegetables, but in a business, you want to believe in what you're doing and actually have a good outcome that underpins your business and brings you your resources back and refills your coffers, whether it's monetarily or energy or renewing the resources of the humans wanting to come to work every day. Every day you wake up, you are a renewed resource. So all of these are sort of intertwined here. And I think that in order to really have long-term sustainability in the sense of sustaining your business and keeping it running as an entity that isn't single use and thrown away, you really have to renew and value the services and the people that are in your company in a way that keeps them wanting to produce and capture a yield as well.
Well, profitability can result from two different approaches, right? The one is extreme efficiency without consideration of people, and the other is the sustainable approach, but of creating environment where employees can feel seen and heard and motivated, and at the same time feel like their opinion counts, their thoughts count, their work counts. All these different aspects motivate the workforce. Now, with the implementation of technology, we humans are looking for ways to show what is the value that we add. And there are different ways to do that, meaning, how can we create the world still where we humans can work hand in hand with technology to create more profitable organizations?
In addressing this issue, I see another permaculture principle of using and valuing diversity. And every human is going to bring a different thing to the table, whether they are trained as a salesperson or you have 5 salespeople. They're still bringing diverse perspectives and also diverse ways of working to the table. So even if you have a technology that kind of eliminates their role, there is a way to value them and see perhaps another thing that they could do that plays to a strength of theirs. And so I think of a forest and I've actually read that there's no like easy way to define a forest because it is a collection of individual things that work together differently than they would if it was just a few of them or if there were other ones in the mix. And even within our bodies, we have huge populations of microflora in our guts, and those could even influence how our brain works. The more diverse your gut microflora are, the more healthy you are. The same with the forest. The more organisms that are inside a forest, the more healthy the forest is because they all work together. And you have the mycelium, the fungal networks in the roots of the trees that actually are able to take information from one tree and pass it on to another so that a healthier tree can, through this fungal network, send its nutrients to a dying tree or vice versa. And it's that type of valuing and integrating. This another permaculture principle is integrate rather than segregate. Cross communication, maybe even in some ways over communication, as long as you can come to a resolution in your conversations. These are ways that, say, two plants planted together as companion plants can help each other in ways that on their own they could never have achieved.
I love the diversity aspect. I know there are many ways to define diversity. For me, diversity comes from different aspects of personality, in addition to all the other diversity aspects, right? But I find it very interesting to observe human behavior and how that behavior changes with different personality mix, meaning how each one of us, just the way we are, influences the interactions, the generation of ideas, the processing of projects, and looking into details or not looking into details, the different approaches that we take because of how individual humans are is essential in creating successful organizations.
Yeah, you could have two people with similar or even the exact same skill sets who are such different aspects of the culture in the company and could detract or build up the culture of the company. So it's not even just what's on a resume or even what you can find out in a meeting, but you really have to observe how the person works and interact with them for a long time necessarily to know how it's going to play out. And people can change too.
And of course, our experiences change us over time. The situations we go through, people we meet, feelings we process, memories. There's so much that plays a role in there that can influence who we are over time. We all change.
You could have a very young forest. Let's say 100 years ago, a pasture was cleared and sheep were grazed there. And then the pasture just sort of, the farmer sold it and it went to seed. And seeds landed there through birds or wind, and trees started growing up. And all of a sudden, you have 100 mid-sized trees. You don't know who's going to be the main trees of this forest in the future. But 400 years from now, if it's just sort of left to become a successional forest, one or two of those trees is going to become the elder tree of the area, they call it. The wolf tree, which is sort of the lone tree left, and that seeds the whole area for the future. So there's no way to know at the very beginning which of the young saplings is going to become that elder tree. But one of them will if left to thrive. So you just kind of have to cultivate and follow the paths and see where things go.
Unpredictability.
Yeah, and within a frame, though, of a predictable long-term pattern.
Which makes it interesting. But I want to pivot slightly here. I want to stay on the permaculture topic, but I also want to pivot into how permaculture influences our societies and our communities. And I know you have been involved in a series of projects, and I would like to talk about that now because this is for me a very beautiful way to implement permaculture into our community. I know you have been involved in a school garden project. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So my children go to a school in New Jersey that it's a Title I elementary school, which means that over half the students are on free or reduced lunch program. That's a proxy for the income levels of the community in the area. Right there on the school property is sort of an underused ball field. It's mostly a dog run at this point. The students never go down there. And I had a vision while walking by one day. Let's put a greenhouse on there. Let's turn this into a food forest. The concept of a food forest is sort of you have anchor trees that would produce fruit for people to eat. And then around them, you can have other zones, maybe some perennial bushes that would have berries or nuts, and then some herbs and other annual vegetables. And they all work together as a concept and as an ecosystem. The older trees can provide shade for the plants that need shade, and the annuals can provide nutrients that would feed the roots for the trees. And humans and even animals can eat the berries and the fruit from the yield that is produced. This isn't a new concept, it's just sort of a new name for traditional practices that have been around for thousands of years. So, I do see some criticism about how permaculture is just sort of a co-opting of indigenous wisdom and a reselling, since people make money off of being permaculturalists. But at the same time, if these concepts can reach more people, I do think that it's important to really understand them. And I do see value in that as well. One of the practices that we use at our garden is the Three Sisters garden. So there's three crops in a Three Sisters garden. There's corn, there's squash or melon. In addition to corn, it could also be amaranth. It could be sunflower. It just needs to be a tall vegetable or fruit that grows. And then beans. And so there's a Native American myth or story, legend, that talks about how these three sisters work together. There's Sister Corn, who is the oldest sister. She's the tallest one. She's the strongest one. She actually provides a framework for the sister bean to grow up. The sister bean is a vine who needs a framework to grow up and to rely upon. And Sister Squash has her leaves go out and she shades the ground so that it doesn't get too parched while the other plants are growing. And corn, squash, and beans together can provide sort of a well-rounded diet. So scientifically, there's basis in these three working together. Also, corn is very extractive of the nutrients in the soil, specifically with nitrogen, and beans replace nitrogen. So even long before we could measure NPK in the soil, indigenous systems had worked out ways to keep the soil fertile and have it be used every year. So there's science behind this mythology, but there's also cultural traditions behind them and just ways that they all work together. So I started a little project. We had a community, like a PTA group, Parent Teacher Association group, come together and design with a parent architect a greenhouse to put on the land. But along with all of this, we figured the PTA is not going to fund this on their own. And we had to start getting grants. So we have been applying for grants. We got $10,000 from the Sustainable Jersey granting organization. That's not enough. I want to build a $30,000 greenhouse. The PTA was able to contribute some as well. And then, using the sort of small and slow solutions, because this has been a year and a half just planning project right now, the small and slow solutions permaculture principle. One thing has led to another when we also applied to get a green team from Montclair State University. It's a bunch of undergraduates who come for a summer internship to do a community assessment, run some events, and also come up with a composting plan and a building plan and a planting plan. We got the help of them as well. So that actually wrapped up yesterday. They gave a presentation to Montclair State University at a big gala event. There were 10 teams total. The other organizations besides our little elementary school were the Nature Conservancy, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, the City of Newark, all these huge, huge entities, and us. And they actually chose us because our project was a little bit different. It brought some diversity to the projects that were going on, but also it had an extremely tangible effect because the students who were working with us met all the kids and they came to the school and they talked to parents. And it wasn't just sort of like a theoretical stormwater mitigation project that they produced a report for. So they actually felt, they obtained a yield. They felt very involved in the project in a personal way. And, we're going to get their report in the next couple days, and hopefully we can keep up this momentum, because one of the main things that I wanted them to recommend on was community engagement, so that, when my kids graduate and I'm not focused on this school every day, someone else can sort of pick it up and move it along. That's also part of another permaculture principle, using creative solutions and responding to change. So as the population changes. We're probably not going to be a Title I school forever. Just looking at the trends and demographics in suburbia, a lot of people are moving from New York City and housing prices are doubling, and a lot of people will get pushed out. So how can we respond to this change and be agile in the future as well and still serve our communities? So these are all things that I've been thinking about with this project in particular.
How has this project changed you? What are some lessons you have learned about yourself during this project?
Well, I've definitely learned that while I love people and I love interacting with people, I don't love directing them, especially volunteers, and if I'm working on a project, I'm pretty much all in on it at the time, but wrangling other people who may have their heart in the right place, but not the time or the resources to follow through is pretty difficult. So that's one way that I look at that as a positive that I've learned that about myself. But I've also understood that if you really do believe in something and you can talk about it in a very passionate way and you can inspire other people, then that can go a long way. And all of a sudden you're a elementary school with 350 kids doing the same kind of project that the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is doing, because it's infectious. Other people can take on your passion and it opens up a lot of doors. And sometimes you just have to ask for some help or let people know what you're doing, and doors open. There's funds or volunteers out there, but you can't do it in a silo.
I cannot wait to hear how this project progresses over time. So, as we're focusing on permaculture this season, we will be touching again over and over on the progress you're making. And I'm curious to see where you are at the end of the season.
I'm sure I'll have stuff to share. In fact, just today, so our property, the school property used to have a lot of trees. In fact, very old trees. The school's 120 years old. Um, and over the years, they've been cut down for various reasons. And I learned from the director of Buildings and Grounds that the last remaining large tree out front was going to be cut down because its roots were impacting the school. And I spoke with him. I didn't want to become the advocate for all of the student body and families, but everyone wanted this tree to stay if possible. And it turned out that he had only consulted their tree removal company on this tree, but not an arborist. So I suggested getting an arborist involved, and he did. And the arborist said, you know what, this particular type of tree, it has a deep taproot, which means it goes very far down, straight down. So you can actually just shave off those roots that are impacting the building, and you can keep this tree for another 15 more years probably. So this morning I learned the tree is going to stay. And it was just, a little extra step that this administrator was willing to take, thank goodness, and we get to keep this tree. And it's little things like that that actually do make a huge difference in the way people's lives are lived.
I'm so glad to hear that. It must feel really good to be able to make a difference like that. So, Jimmy, thank you so much for this introduction and great segue into our season three, the beginnings of how can we leverage permaculture principles to build organizations, to build communities, and make a difference every day.
Yeah, it's something that's very close to my heart and the way that I try and live my life. One principle that we didn't mention, which is my favorite, is using edges and valuing the marginal. And I think that's what we're going to be doing on this season. We're going to be sort of, if you think about an edge zone where two different ecosystems meet, maybe the edge of a pond and the edge of a field. It's a very, very diverse. You have elements from both sides coming together and emerging in a new way. And that's what I hope we do with this season, is sort of find new ways that we can bring together permaculture and business, which are both ecosystems, in ways that are mutually beneficial and that maybe haven't necessarily been talked about or even existed before.
I love that. Excellent. Using edges.
Ruminate on that for a while.
So let us dive into this and look into our future guests and how can we explore further the idea of the permaculture.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Jamie.
Bye.